A vendor is a person or business that sells goods or services. In CenterPoint, the vendors you set up will be those that you need to make payments to or enter invoices for. Vendors are used on the payments, vendor invoices, and pay invoices due screens. If you have the purchase orders module, vendors are also used in that module. A list of vendors is maintained on the vendor setup list underneath Setup and Vendors. In this video, we will learn how to create new vendors and discuss the General and Addresses tabs of the vendor setup. To create a new vendor from the vendor setup screen, we could click the New button and it'll take us into a vendor setup detail, which has several tabs across the top. This video will go into detail on the General and Addresses tabs. The remaining tabs are discussed in additional videos. You'll need to fill in the necessary information to create a new vendor and then click Save to save the vendor. Another way to create a new vendor right from the vendor setup list is by copying a vendor that you already have on the list that has similar details to the one you want to create. You can highlight that vendor and click the Copy button, and that'll copy all of the details from that vendor into a new record where you can make the necessary changes to create an additional new vendor. Another way to create a new vendor is right from your transactions screens. I'm going to open up a vendor invoice screen, and anywhere where there's a vendor lookup, you can click on the lookup. And on that screen that comes up, there'll be a button that says New, which will allow you to create a new vendor. The other option is to just right-click in that field, and you can select New from there, and that takes you into the vendor setup detail to create a new vendor as well. Before I go into the vendor detail and talk about the General and Addresses tabs, I want to talk about some of the buttons at the bottom of this screen. To edit a vendor, you can highlight the vendor and click the Edit button, or you can double click on the vendor. Both will take you into the vendor setup detail where you can make whatever changes you need to that vendor and then click Save to save those changes. You can delete a vendor on the list by highlighting the vendor and clicking the Delete button and then confirming that you want to delete the record. Now it'll delete the record as long as it hasn't been used in a transaction. If it's been used in a transaction and you choose to delete it, you're going to get a message that says it's unable to delete it. If you want to get that vendor off the list of vendors that comes up when you're in transaction entry, then what you can do is you can deactivate it. You can do that by right-clicking on the vendor, choosing Activate, Deactivate. On the left, you'll have a list of companies in this database, or if you're a fund accounting customer, a list of funds that are in your database, and you can move over to the right any company or fund that you want to deactivate the vendor for and click the Deactivate button. If you have more names or vendors on the list that are really the same vendor and you want to merge activity from both of those into a single vendor, you can do it using the Combine button. Using Combine, what you want to do is highlight the one that you want to get rid of first, then click Combine and highlight the one that you want to merge it into, and click OK. And then you're going to want to confirm that. It is a good idea to take a backup when doing any combining. I'm going to say yes, and what it did was it deleted the one that I wanted to get rid of, and it took any activity that was going to that one and it moved it to the one I said I wanted to keep. And now I'm going to go into the vendor so that we can talk about the General and Addresses tabs. This is the same screen you come to when you're creating a new vendor. First, you're going to identify whether that vendor is a business or individual, and that's going to change the field that's labeled company. When it's business, it's a company. When it's an individual, it's last name, suffix, first name, middle initial. It also determines how any tax ID that's entered into the federal tax ID will show up on any forms such as your 1099s, any tax forms. If it is a business, that'll be defaulted to be formatted as an EIN number. If it is an individual, it'll be a social security number. It can be overwritten on the tax form itself. Under accounting information, you can select a payment term for the invoices that you receive from this vendor, and that'll help to calculate the due date and also calculate any discount options that they've offered you. If the term that you need is not on that list, you can click the New button. After that, you have a place where you can select the default accounts payable account that you want those invoices to be attached to. Now with both of these options, you can right click on the field and set it as a default. You can do that with many of the lookup options and set it as a default so that it'll be filled in next time you create another new vendor. The abbreviation field is optional, but if you're going to use it, you might also want to right click on it and determine how you want to handle duplicates, whether you want to allow duplicates, warn if duplicated, or say that no duplicates are allowed. Next to that is a checkbox that if you check it, it'll put payments on hold for the vendor, which means you could still enter in invoices, but the invoices aren't going to come up on the Pay Invoices Due screen to pay until you remove the checkbox. There is the ability to create what we call vendor groups, and you can assign this vendor to a group. Those groups will help you to filter lists of vendors when you go to run reports. Okay, if you want to either select a group or create one, you could click on the lookup and select a group that you've already created, or click on the New button to create a new one. You'll then need to enter in either a company name or an individual name, depending on the format you chose. If there is a contact at the organization, you can put the contact information in. You have a couple lines of address that you can enter in, and then the city, state, and zip. If your address is a foreign address, there are other options for that third line. Next to the address are some communication methods for this address, such as phone, cell phone, fax, and email. All of those are optional. Under the tax and other information, if this is a vendor that you need to issue a 1099 for, you need to have a tax ID in the tax ID field. There is a place for a state tax ID if you want to have one in there. And in the memo field, what this is used for is every time I write a check out to this vendor, they want me to put the account number on the check. So anytime you have a memo in here, it'll automatically appear in the check or in the memo field on the check when you write a check to that vendor. There are many ways to pay a vendor in CenterPoint. One of the ways is through a computerized check. Another one might be through a manual check, manual handwritten check, which would have a different sequence of numbers. Or it might be an electronic funds transfer or through an ACH file. All of those you might create a different sequence of numbers for. So what you want to select in the payment sequence field is this sequence that you would use most often for this vendor. And then it'll default that sequence as soon as you select the vendor on the transaction screen. Okay, if you're going to be using mostly the same sequence for all of your vendors, you of course can right click and set it as a default. If you need to issue a 1099 for this vendor, you can check the box to issue the 1099 for the vendor. We integrate with a product called Atrix in order to produce your tax forms. If one of the options that they have is for the vendor to receive an electronic only tax form. They do need to consent to that, otherwise you need to provide them with a written copy, but if they do consent, you can then type in the, select that box and then type in the email that you want that consent to go to, or click on the down arrow, and if there are emails already available or entered in, you can select one of those. There is an active status button on the bottom right corner of the screen. It's another way to make the vendor active or inactive, and you click on it. Any vendor or any company with a check mark in it, this vendor is active for. Any company or fund without a check mark, it is inactive for. Under the options button, you could set tab stops on this screen, so you can take off fields of information you don't use very often. Like for example, I don't enter in any FAFSA numbers for my vendors, so I've taken it out of the tab sequence. At the bottom of the screen are three icons. The first two are icons that would allow you to attach documents to this vendor that you can store with the vendor record. There is a separate video on how to handle file attachments, on how to set up the scanner, and where to store those documents, whether it be in the database or in a file repository. So you'll want to view those videos on how to do that. Next to the attachments is a button that usually isn't yellow. It's yellow right now because I have notes already entered in. When you click on that button, it provides a place for you to enter in notes about this vendor. With each note, you also can click on the stamp at the bottom and it'll provide a timestamp for that note. I'm going to go now to the Addresses tab. You'll notice that there's already one address, and that's the address that we entered in on the General tab, including the contact or the communication method that was entered in, which was the email address entered in on that screen. Okay. If I have other addresses for this vendor, I don't need to create another record for the vendor. I could just add another address. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to add another address. The location is another billing type of address. If you need to add new location types, you can click New to add new location types. You do need to give that address a name. I'm going to call this their Chicago location. The contact there is Sam. And the address for each address that you enter in, if you want to print this contact person name on the form, you check this box. That means it's going to print on the check. If you write out the check, that the contact name as well as the company name will print on the check. Later on, if you don't need this address any longer, you can make it inactive. One address can be selected per vendor to be the default billing address, business address, shipping address, or pay-to address for the vendor. Billing and shipping really don't apply to vendors as much as they do to customers, but the default business address is the address that you would see on the General tab. And the default pay-to address is the address that checks will be addressed to by default. As soon as I check one of these boxes, whatever address was originally marked as the default becomes unchecked. So as I check that one, I could go over to the other address to see that it was unchecked. You'll notice at the bottom that each address maintains its own communication methods. So it has its own set of email, phone, fax, cell phone numbers. So this address has this email address in it, and this address doesn't have any communication methods entered in yet. If you need to add more communication methods, you could click on the Communication Methods button and add more communication methods. Each address also has its own notes, so you do have the ability to add notes per address. All you have to do is highlight the address, and I'm just going to put in this as a note. And then as soon as I do that, this one will change to edit notes, but this one doesn't have any notes, so it's still labeled additional notes. Okay, when you're done making your entries to or your changes to this vendor or entering in this vendor and you're ready to save them, you could click the Save button. And as I discussed before, the remaining tabs are discussed in additional videos.